Okay, welcome to episode 4 of The Journey here at Ridgecrest. I'm joined today again by Chase Falk and Lance Griffin. How's everybody doing?
Hey, we're good.
Doing good, Broxton. Crazy episode 4.
Good Thanksgiving?
Yeah, the three of us were in the podcast studio for episode 3, and this is a new day, the week after Thanksgiving, because we have to do our timestamp.
Yeah, today is December 2nd, 2024. Not sure when you'll be listening to this, but this is when we're recording it.
Everybody having good conversations around the Thanksgiving dinner table?
You know, I don't even remember what we talked about around the Thanksgiving dinner table. I know we ate some good food, enjoyed time with family, and then watched a bunch of football.
Yeah. It's I don't know that it's ever really been an issue with us. We usually talk about nonsensical things at the Thanksgiving dinner table. You know, a lot of people worry about topical conversations when you get family in and everything, but we always just talk about crazy stuff and nothing really heavy.
Yeah, I don't think we had any heavy conversation at all. I mean, we had some conversations like with Lee and the kids, like leading up to Thanksgiving, like, hey, what's your thing? You know, tried to be a little intentional with them. And it's kind of interesting hearing, 3-year-old, 4-year-old and 6, 9, and 11-year-old tell us what they're thankful for. But
Amen. So what's on everybody's mind?
well, it's a Monday today, so I don't know how y'all feel on Mondays, but it's almost like it takes my mind a little bit to process the weekend where we've been, and then coming off of like time off. I don't know that my mind started spinning yet, which is interesting because it normally doesn't ever
Your
stop
mind's
spinning.
normally always spinning.
I will say after last week's conversation, though, last podcast, my mind has been spinning. And to y'all's credit for what we talked about, I've listened to a few different things and jumped into reading some stuff on Substack, which I don't even know how all that works yet. Got to figure all that out with y'all.
Congratulations on making it there.
Okay, so we can go 2 directions now. We can talk about, what other thoughts you've had based on last week's discussion and what it's led you to, or we can talk about Substack.
You're the host, man. Run with what you want to run with.
Well, I mean, we have to give Lance the first, do you ask Chase what's on his mind?
What's on my mind?
He responded Monday, so.
I mean, well.
As the host, I'll pick the more interesting.
We might as well just go straight to Chase.
Well, Lance, let's see if you're more interesting than I am.
No, we still want to hear.
I was just thinking about when you said it was a Monday. I mean, I was on vacation and then came back for the short Thanksgiving week. And now it's the 1st of December and it's going to be crazy. The month of December and January are just going to be crazy. And I don't know, you've experienced it a few times, so you just kind of ride it and let it go. But we'll have something going on every night pretty much in December and January. So I'll turn around and it'll be Groundhog Day.
Explain that, Lance, to our listeners, because, I mean, I don't know that everybody understands the dynamic of what you're talking about.
Because there are going to be people out there that there's the typical, what do you mean you work more than Sunday and Wednesday? Then on top of that, you're a recreation minister, so people really probably think that about you. So
Doubly. So we are the host facility for the Wiregrass Kings Homeschool Sports Association, which basically means that we we host all of their basketball and volleyball games. So they have a pretty robust schedule. They'll play about 35 games this year. Half of those will be at our place. So we'll have, girls games, JV boys games, junior high boys games, varsity boys games. That'll go on for a lot of December and January. And then when that's not happening, we're also one of the sites for Kids Church League basketball. That is administered by Covenant Church, and Michael over at Covenant does a great job doing that. But there are about 500 and something kids that are registered for Kids Church League basketball. So we'll host a lot of those games as well. And so if we're not having the Wiregrass Kings one night, we'll have Kids Church League, and it's not a ton of work. It's just you need to be here for it. So
how do you handle that, Lance, when it's a crazy couple months personally and not? And
you're also hosting your show.
Yeah, got a weekday sports talk show to get the day started. I don't know. I think you just kind of ride it. That's usually what I do, and maybe I don't know if that's the right approach or not, but you just make sure that you've got your end of things tied up and that you're ready to go. And it seems like it's a pleasant experience for everybody. People love the facility and enjoy playing here, both the Kings and the kids that come through. So we're blessed to have it. And hopefully it's a good atmosphere for everybody when they come in. And like I said, we've gotten things taken care of on our end.
Yeah, I think talking about our facilities and just the blessing that they are, such an opportunity for ministry on a daily basis. And I would say even the average person at our church might not understand the opportunity for ministry over there at the gym, whether it's just daily recreational, fitness stuff or using the track or game room or whatever, to actually bringing in all of these people on our campus. I mean, like when there is a Wiregrass Kings basketball game, how many people show up, Lance, to a game?
If we have a pretty full slate, and by full slate I mean JV boys, girls, right, and varsity boys, yeah, we'll have the gym pretty full.
Yeah.
Usually. They had a very, very dominant team a couple of years ago, and they went to the National Homeschool Association things, and we actually had people come in from the community to watch them. They were that good.
Yeah.
But, homeschool parents are very good about supporting their program, and so not only parents but aunts, uncles, everybody will show up for that, and it's usually hopping around there.
Yeah, it makes me think when you think about it like that, though, is just, again, the opportunity. Last podcast we talked about opportunities in the journey and how right now there's an opportunity out there to make a difference in maybe ways that are different than they have been in the past. So, we have the ability as a church to welcome people. Yes, they may be associated with a church or with our homeschool association, but still, who knows what the Lord's doing in their life, and just being a welcoming, open, smiling door that somebody can come into. Who knows how God could use that to maybe jump into church one day or take seriously the journey of following the Lord. So that's a pretty cool thought.
Yeah, we want to make sure that everybody has a positive experience when they're here, and obviously, hopefully they come away feeling positive about Ridgecrest, whether they're members here or not. And our Mike Christensen is our full-time staff person over at the gym, and he does just a tremendous job. I mean, he's invaluable.
Such a servant.
Oh, yeah.
Money Mike.
Money Mike.
That's what we like to call him.
That's another thing. Money Mike's got vacation days that he's got to take before the end of the year, so it's going to be Money Lance, I guess, which is fine.
Lance, you mentioned just riding out the time frame, and I'm sure both of y'all have heard this before, but when we think about a journey and walking with Jesus, there are portions of our journey that are not always smooth. They're not always chill and easy. And our pastor has talked to me about, there being seasons on our journey, and knowing that a season has a start point and an end point, and working through those seasons and viewing it that way. He always has encouraged me that's been helpful to make it through those riding out moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Pastor said the same thing, when I've told him before, I'm like, we're getting into the, December and January are going to be the two busiest months. And, he's been very encouraging. He says, that's part of ministry. Sometimes it'll be like that. And that, you understand that that's going to be the case, and you just do whatever you need to do. And I think that's trying to put everything in perspective. Many, many, many people have worse situations to work through in their workplaces, because I'm very, very blessed. It's just going to happen to be a busy season. That's all.
Amen. All right, Chase.
But to what you were
there's
saying about getting into Substack and looking at some things based on what we talked about last week, I did come across this Wall Street Journal headline that really ties into what we were talking about
Bible sales
last week. Yeah. Sales of Bibles are booming, fueled by first-time buyers and new versions. First of all, I'm wondering, how do they know somebody's buying a Bible for the first time?
You mean last time you went to Lifeway, they didn't ask you? Well, we don't go to Lifeway anymore. But
What's that?
Yeah, when you checked out on Amazon or your Bible, it didn't say, "Is this your first Bible or second Bible?"
Exit polling outside of Barnes and Noble or Amazon, or
I mean, based on what we talked about last week, I don't really have a reason to doubt that. I just wondered how they decided that was the case. But I think this goes into what we were talking about last week, that there's a I don't know, a spark or a
vibe shift.
I think so. Are you sensing it?
Well, I mean, I spend all of my time on the internet, so yeah, but I don't know if that is going to equate to real life or not. But I do have, along those lines, I do have a question of, we talked about what we talked about last week about people that you would not really consider traditionally open to Christianity being open to it now. We talked about why that is, and maybe Chase has some more thoughts, but my question is, how do we square something like what we talked about last week with Bible sales are higher than ever, or not? I don't know if it said higher than ever, but they're up. How do we square those two things with it also feeling like things have never been worse culturally? I mean, our pastor talks about that a lot, about, things happening in the culture that he has never seen in his lifetime, in his ministry over 40 years. So how do we, not to get into a big discussion of eschatology, but I mean, how does that, because it does seem that way. It does seem like, wow, things are really, I can't believe I'm seeing what I'm seeing. But also there does seem to be at least some evidence of something changing. And I don't know that any one of us can put our finger on what it is. But
I think a couple things. First off, I've found myself sometimes looking at society and having this mentality of like, this is the worst ever. And Broxton, I know you and I have kind of talked about, a little bit of that in the past about how do we know that what's happening right now is worse than any other time and period of history? So I think, initially, I think the viewpoint of that probably is more accurately depicted through the worst we have seen or the worst that we have ever experienced. And so I think that is kind of important, because you can go back to scripture and read some stuff happened and you're like, whoa, I mean, I don't ever hope for that or have, seen anything like that. So, but then secondly, in that, I think, I guess, I don't know if it was on the podcast or somewhere, it was mentioned recently, I think in a setting that would have been around the church, would have been just the reality of how dark times are, how bright there is the opportunity for light. And so maybe there's a side of that yes, things are, worse than they've been in our lifetime, but also because of how dark that is, that brightness of that light shines. And I think what's important, I think I mentioned this the last time I preached, and talking about dealing with the times that we're living in and taking them serious and allowing them to fuel our walk with Jesus, is that a generation that we have right now that a younger generation, they don't want to just hear the doom and gloom message. And there's nothing wrong with the doom and gloom message, especially when it's reality. Yes, there's a lot of bad stuff out there. But a younger generation nowadays wants to not only hear, yes, things are difficult, yes, things are hard and bad, but there is an opportunity and God has a plan for your life, and there is a purpose right where you live, work, and play is an opportunity for you to allow your light to shine greater in the darkness.
Yeah, I think that there is a correlation, I believe, in what at least is perceived as a darker culture probably will fuel Bible sales or a renewed interest in Christianity, because I think what people are seeing is that whatever they had been basing their belief system off of, it may not be working for them. So they're going to turn to something else, which again is a great opportunity for the church to be ready for that moment. So I think that's true. I was reading Romans, and Romans 12:2 is, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And there's never been a time where that verse was inaccurate. People always want to pine for the good old days, but there never were any good old days. There would never be a time where Romans 12:2 didn't apply. So there's never been a time when you wanted to be conformed to this world. So I think the culture's always been dark. It's just, for the longest, we really didn't understand what was happening outside the square mile that we lived in. Right. And now in the world that we live in now, I mean, you can obviously look at anything at any time like, okay, Portland's going nuts. Things must be crazy. But I think that's always been the case, but we just perceive it more because we have access to so much information now.
I would be interested to see what translation is, because I think that was part of the headline, was based on new translations being available. I'd be interested to see what translations those are, why that is. Like, I guess it would help if I went to read the article, but
you saw the article though, it seemed like.
Yeah, I saw it. I saw it on Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter. And then, like, is it study Bibles, or is it just, your regular reference Bible? And then what plays into all that? Because then you get into, okay, well, I need a study Bible to help me I'm new to this. There's nothing wrong with study Bibles, but then you're getting into what happens with, okay, well, who edited the study notes and what comes along with all that? It's just a side question, but
we need a producer to look this stuff up so we don't have to, but I did call it up. Well, and this is interesting too, because Faith and Life is the name of a website. It offers more than 270 Bibles, including a $95 leather-bound giant print option, $7.99 pocket-sized New Testament. Others sell graphic novel Bibles.
Those are interesting. I've seen those in Sam's.
Have you checked them out? Yeah,
I have. So my kids expressed, some interest in looking at them. And so we opened them up, and, I don't know. I couldn't go there. With the comic book look a little bit, it just, I don't know. It just seemed to me a little bit to be, not as too cartoony, too kind of cheesy, the way it kind of depicts some stuff. So I wasn't a big fan, but I'm not obviously, if that's what someone needs, as long as it's accurately portraying the story and there's truth in that, if it helps a kid that has never have access to the gospel, or someone could use it as an evangelistic tool, I'm not opposed to them.
So where do you stand on VeggieTales?
VeggieTales, man, that came out of nowhere.
It didn't come out of nowhere. He was talking about the silly nature
there.
Well, okay, so I guess I stand okay with VeggieTales. My kids actually had a VeggieTale in the car DVD playing last night.
What about Bible Man? Do you remember Bible Man?
We have a Bible Man book at our house. Okay. I will honestly say, when Will Taylor, our youngest, wants me to read that book, I do the best I can to skim through it and make that book as quickly as possible. Not that I'm opposed to Bible Man, I just can't get in the story. So
I was a big Bible Man fan.
You were a big Bible Man fan?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah.
Explain that. I need to.
Well, I don't remember much about it. I just remember watching the videos.
There's been a time as you grew up, there's been a time where you've graduated from the Bible as cartoon to the Bible as truth. That would be my only concern, is that if, you don't want to send the message that the Bible is just a story like anything else. We're obviously transforming our lives around it, hopefully. So that would be the only problem I would have of it. But most people seem to graduate from that fine, I would think.
And yet it is a story. And there's a lot that goes along with that.
Yeah, well, that's true. It just depends on what kind of story you view it as. And we talked about that in the last podcast, is that you don't want society, as they turn to Christianity, to look at it as something other than truth. We talked about Jordan Peterson, and he's not there yet. He's looking at the Bible as a way to explain certain archetypes. There may be some value in that, but that doesn't really get to what the gospel is all about, which is Jesus's blood paying for the sin that you can't pay for. That's the heart of the gospel, and that's, I think Jordan Peterson is still kind of in that self-help area there, that the Bible was never meant to stop there. It is self-help, but it's way more than that.
Another interesting point as we talk about Bibles here. So the other day we were at the house, and Will Taylor comes in to the kitchen with a page out of the Jesus Storybook Bible, and he was throwing it away. And there's a lot of things that could come out of this as far as a sermon illustration one day. Mm-hmm. But the page that he was throwing away was Jesus hanging on the cross. And I was like, that's a pretty important page, like trying to navigate this with a 3-year-old, trying to figure this out. And I was like, buddy, what's wrong? And he said, well, Dad, it's scary, Dad. It's scary. And I mean, to the little dude's credit, it's a pretty intense page, obviously, in picture. But he was getting rid of that thing. And so after he threw it away, I had to dig it out of the trash and bring the tape out. And I think it's right now in a drawer that we got to tape it all back together and put it back in the Bible. But
that is an interesting thing to navigate.
That's been the Jesus Storybook Bible has been our favorite Bible to read to our kids, as far as a cartoon or a kind of storyline Bible to them.
So onto the Jordan Peterson stuff. You've joined Substack, and you've been thinking a lot about last week's conversation.
Yeah, so I was
Elaborate.
already on Substack. I was there. I was in the world, but I pulled it up and was actually looking at it. And I don't even know what I'm looking at. So
okay, well, let's try to break that down.
I'll have to have a tutorial by dummy kind of thing.
What do you mean you don't know what?
Well, okay, both of you guys have profiles on Substack.
They're called publications.
Okay, publications that have your name, and then you have your. I'm serious. This is I feel like I'm sitting at Thanksgiving table with my grandmother right here because I don't know this stuff. So it's a publication, Broxton's publication, Lance's publication, but then that you have a named blog or a named something else. How does that work?
So Substack is less than 10 years old.
Oh, yeah. I would think.
I would say probably 7 to 8 years old, maybe. They started out as a newsletter platform. So, I mean, sounds self-explanatory, but for those that don't know what a newsletter is, you give somebody your email address, and in exchange, they send you, newsletters of their writing, whatever it might be.
Right.
You're receiving this podcast probably through our newsletter, thejourneypodcast.substack.com. So at least you figured something out if you're listening to the podcast. But so Substack is a few years old. They started out as a newsletter platform. It's a bunch of former journalists, authors, stuff like that. They have this big grand goal to what is their mission statement? Something about reforming the creator economy or something like that. That they started out with the goal of getting writers paid directly by their subscribers. So you would have traditionally, and Lance can speak a lot to this, working in journalism, you would have an author tied to some kind of publication, whether it be the Wall Street Journal, we mentioned them earlier, the New York Times, whatever platform you want to talk about. And Lance knows a lot more about this than I would, but the compensation model for that is probably not good for writers. So Substack wanted to change that by giving writers a direct relationship to subscribers. So you give me your email address, I'll send you my material with the goal of you paying me directly through that if you value what I'm putting out, basically. So that's how they did it for a few years. And then probably 2.5 to 3 years ago, maybe, they introduced Notes, which is, I have a lot of thoughts on this. It's their version of social media, really. And it's, there are no ads, so it's not driven by ad revenue or anything like that. So that's a big difference between Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, YouTube. There is still an algorithm. So like you've been interacting with our stuff, they'll show you more of what they think you'll like. I mean, I like it. It's cool. It is in some ways better than something like Twitter or Facebook, but it's still social media. Yeah. And so like it's going to have its own problems eventually. But that, to explain what you're asking, like you have a newsletter that Lance and I publish on our own blog, but then we have the social media side of it, which is called Substack Notes. Does that help explain it a little bit?
Is that two separate things, or you have a created newsletter through your profile? Like, that's what I don't understand. Like
you sign up. So like you signed up as a host on this podcast. And so you're on there as Chase Falk. If you wanted to start a newsletter, you could, and then you would come up with a name, Chase's newsletter. And people could subscribe with their email address, and you could send them newsletters. But that is not the notes, and the newsletter side is different. So like,
although I think Notes was created in Substack to give authors an opportunity to share their work outside the ones that already subscribe to them. So I think that was how Notes came about, but it's turned out to be more than that, where you can just share random thoughts if you want to do that as well. But you can create a note and append one of your blogs to it, and it gets out to a bigger audience, and some random person may see it in their algorithm, and they may tap on it and read it and think, okay, I might be interested in reading more, and they'll subscribe, and you can grow your subscriber base that way.
Yeah, I probably got 10 subscribers this weekend from Notes. So,
well, yeah, y'all had me running around last week looking at all that and not like going crazy or anything. But then I'm like, all right, well, maybe this is something I need to check into. And
so now you understand a little bit more about what it is.
Yeah.
So what else do you like? What have you been getting into?
Oh, I hadn't really done a whole lot. I really just wanted to see. I mean, I've seen y'all's stuff, so I've kind of went back through and looked some of that. I'd really like to just be able to look at y'all's stuff. I chased a few things. I guess maybe I saw where you were on a podcast or something with another guy, so I kind of looked at his stuff a little bit. But my thing is, I don't want something that I'm gonna get lost in the scroll in, and like that's a little bit of the dilemma that I saw. Like when it starts giving you all these other people, I'm like, I don't care about that right now. Like I don't want to get lost in that. I'm more so interested in seeing what you guys are, and I hadn't really searched for really anything yet. So I mean, part of me, like I like the idea of maybe writing something, it being more like probably memory, family kind of relate, like more of moment kind of things for us, like to be able to look back one day and remember and have something strategic with that, and I think that's something that, as we talk about the journey or something, for me personally, like try to make sure I don't miss the day, with the kids or something that's going on, or even just, we've talked about that around the office or whatever. And so I kind of like to see something like that. And I see where you can add pictures and all that kind of stuff. So it'd be cool to kind of create something that you could do like that. That's something I've kind of thought about, but I didn't know how to do that. So
I mean, because they're trying to change the media economy, whatever goes into all that, they are, like I said, it started out just newsletters, but now, I mean, we're hosting this podcast on Substack, so you can do audio, you can do written content, obviously, and you can also do video.
Yeah.
So you used to want to do that with the vlog. You know, we used to do a vlog here at Ridgecrest called The Crest.
Yeah.
And Chase had previously talked about wanting to kind of do like a family vlog. And it sounds like the idea is still in his head.
I mean, I don't know. There's something about a camera that I think takes a person to a place that they're not really them.
Yep.
And, I had to kind of navigate through the season of camera, vlog, whatever. It was fun. I mean, we enjoyed it. I think it worked well for COVID and our student ministry stuff here, but it's just not, I mean,
when it's very hard.
Yeah. And it's not worth it. Like, it's added stress to a life that's already stressful. So like, why would I do that?
And it's time consuming.
Yeah. And I enjoyed some of the stuff that came with that, but again, it's not my job. It's not worth and the reality of actually going viral and making money is very,
well, people think, like, oh, I could be a influencer or a YouTube star and I can make however many $1 million people make, but it's not like you don't just do that.
It's interesting too.
There's a lot that goes into that to get to that point.
I actually watched this hour and a half long YouTube video last night on the guys the Dude Perfect guys, that are millionaires from.
They were on game day this last week.
Yes, they were. But my kids are really into them. And one just quick side note for families out there that potentially are listening, I thought it was very intriguing when I was listening to them. Like, their goal is to create family oriented content. And so like everything they do is filtered through that. So like, as a dad, their dads, I guess maybe all of them are dads. I'm not sure if they all have kids or not, but like, they want to create stuff that their kids can just sit down and watch, and you don't have to be worried about what's going to pop up or what's there. And so they've created an app, and the app has it has ads, but it's all controlled ads and ways like that. And they also have a few other YouTube channels that they promote through the app, and you can watch it through their app. And so basically, I say all that to say, just a great avenue for entertainment that you can safely trust right now with our kids. But I say all that to say, like, you're talking about even how hard it is to go big. Well, those guys are big, very big, obviously. And they just still talk about how hard it is just in general, just even though they got everything they could ever want, and they have a lot of fun making kid videos with their friends.
It does sound glamorous, but like, if you think about your livelihood and feeding your kids being dependent on you posting a video today and all that goes into that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like being a pro golfer. Like, yeah, I mean, golf's fun, but if you're not going to eat, if you don't make a cut, not fun.
Well, so, when you think about what it takes to gain an audience like that, Mr. Beast, I mean, he went from whatever his meager beginnings were, where he was just putting stuff out there off the cuff, to spending $10 million on an 8-minute video.
Yeah.
To make $20 million. Where does it end? Eventually, it's going to scale up to the point that you just can't go any further. And I wonder what the logical outcome of that is. And man, like you said, I mean, there's just a lot of stress that comes with that.
So part of it is like going back to our conversation about Substack and creating this stuff or trying to write or whatever. Like, I kind of, like, again, last week, and maybe it was of the Lord that I couldn't figure it all out. But like, initially I'm like, man, I'm just going to jump into this. I'm about to create me this thing and going to create a what'd you call it, a publicate or, like a blog or a blog on here and kind of start this up. And I had this whole grand idea and then I couldn't figure it out. And so I just like let it be. But I was like, well, maybe it was of the Lord in general. Cause like, internally my brain goes to like, I just want to be able to do this to enjoy putting this out there and just having it here. But also there's a side of it like, oh, I'd like to have subscribers or people follow, like this pride in me that like wants to grow this brand of myself. And it's like, I don't need that or have to have, it's like being okay with just getting on there to like the struggle I have is, can I do this and write these things and just be okay with it being what it's going to be versus like constantly checking how many people's looked at it or what they've said on it, or if there's been any kind of thing. And I don't know if I trust myself with not being able to be too worked up about the other.
Yeah. I think two things. One, with obviously as a journalism major, I mean, I'm a writer and always will be. So it's the best platform that I've found to just allow you to write about what interests you, not really for the purpose of gaining a following. If people want to subscribe to it, I mean, I guess that's a bonus, but if something strikes me that would be interesting or fun to write about, I just write about it and send it out. And it's just the things that interest me. If there's a following for it, that's fine. But if not, there was just something inside of me that I needed to get out. And I scratched that itch. But I also think that as opposed to Facebook or X or anything else where you're most of the time working in very tiny spurts, it often lends itself to the worst possible interactions. And you see that a lot on the microburst parts of social media. But with Substack, you get a chance to write essays where you can explain what you're thinking in 1,500 words or 5,000 words or however many you want to use. And you can flesh that out. And I think there's an attraction to that, even in a short attention span society that we live in. And that's why you also see a lot of the long form podcasts where Joe Rogan can talk with a guy for 3 hours and 15 minutes, or Lex Fridman can talk with a guy for 6 hours or whatever. And it's got an audience. I like that idea of being able to flesh out thoughts more than just trying to attack it in 240 character spurts.
Yeah. And I think that with the podcast and with longer form writing, I mean, that's a big thing I've learned in my own journey. Like when you're in college and you are exposed to a lot of different ideas. And so you're also like in the part of your life where your brain's really being formed. And so there's a lot that goes on there. I mean, the amount of time that I've spent listening to podcasts, I don't know. Like I could look at my Spotify thing from last year and tell you exactly last year. But I mean, last year was, relatively low compared to my time in college. But all this does a certain thing that is really good. It shows you that, actually people are kind of complicated, and you can have somebody that you disagree with on what you say is, well, I disagree with them on principle. Well, what you really disagree with is their 140 character statement that they just made about whatever topic it is that really just simply cannot be summed up in 140 characters.
Very few things can.
Right. And so like I've been through that personally, whether it's like theological stuff or political stuff or church stuff that's like, I can't believe that somebody would believe this and say this. But if you got down and you were sitting here in my office with them and they had a mic and I had a microphone, and then you actually start talking about like, okay, well, you said this. And I mean, that's why people like Joe Rogan are so popular, whether you agree with him or not. He will sit down with you and he'll say, what did you mean when you said this? I understand what everybody said you meant, but like, what did you mean? And then that person gets the chance to explain that. And I think I don't want to spiritualize it, but I mean, there is a discipleship element of that going on here, which is part of the reason that we wanted to do this podcast. And we don't always know what that looks like and know what that means, but that's part of the journey of figuring that out.
Yeah, I think there's a depth element that definitely appeals to me, and I hope it does to others as well, in that, well, of course I didn't mention this in my 240 character post because I didn't have room to do it. But if you give me an unlimited length where I can flesh out a thought for a couple of thousand words, you're going to understand me a lot better than if I tried to sum it down in one paragraph. And that appeals to me anyway, and I hope it does to other people too, because I think that is, like you said, I think there's definitely a tie to discipleship there.
Yeah, I can definitely, like, just initially looking at things a little bit more that I had with this in the last week or so now, it's like there seems to be more of a depth there. I mean, this is like a resource potential driven direction versus just like, I mean, there can be depth to social media to an extent, but it's a lot of times it seems more obviously just meaningless scrolling, and whereas this is like, hey, this is an article here that has research behind it, that has, clear, thought process that one's trying to portray a certain thing about a topic. And it's, I mean, there's stuff out there too that I think that's important to read. I mean, it is neat to read other stuff, and not just even in the church world, things that are going on out there. And so I definitely agree that there's depth to the content that I've seen on there. I guess the only problem with depth there is, again, you take more time, spend more time reading, which is not a bad thing. I think it's better to spend more time reading things with a deeper thought process to it than it is just scrolling meaninglessly, on social media.
So what do you, I guess I don't really know what I'm trying to ask here, but I mentioned the discipleship aspect of it. And I mean, my biggest struggle in my role has always been, because I feel like I've understood a lot of this for a long time because of all the time I've spent listening to podcasts. So like, as well, both of you are responsible for discipleship here at Ridgecrest. And so is it just, when we talk about the depth, is it just like, for example, you can have a sermon and Brother Ray can preach on whatever he's going to preach on forgiveness or stewardship, whatever. And that's like a 30,000 foot view of stewardship, what the Bible is going to say about stewardship. But then you can go to a small group and you can spend, in Man Church case, 30 or 40 weeks talking about a thing. How do we do that? Like, I'm not saying that everybody should have a podcast, because there's also this element of, oh, wow, everybody already does have a podcast and we don't really need that. But we kind of do. Like, and it's not really the medium of a podcast that we're talking about here. It's really just hey, why don't you sit down and have a conversation aspect of discipleship.
Well, yeah, I mean, goodness, to me, when I talk depth to Substack or to podcast or to blogs or books or resources like that, I mean, in a lot of ways, that's more, to me, a discipling in your, knowledge or your more of your understanding to what you believe or what, God's word says, or a thought towards a theological direction. And so, but that's a very slim view and part of discipleship. And I think the group element of a Man Church or Kingdom Women or some of our rad groups, and even our connection groups, the level of togetherness and community, that accountability that you need with a conversation with, the three of us sitting in the room right now, of like, God, what's God teaching you? What are you struggling with? How can we be praying for each other? Like, those are the elements of depth to me in discipleship that happens in a group that you're never going to get from a podcast. You're never going to get from a Substack, publication. But you're not going to get it even from going to listen to Big Church, if we can call it still Big Church.
Big Church.
So, but there's growth happening in all of that. But, true discipling relational experience is going to happen with a couple guys. Recently, just for me, within the last year, me and two other guys meet every Tuesday night at 8:30. And there has been more depth in my personal walk with Jesus and being a disciple, I believe, out of that Tuesday night 8:30 meeting with those guys. And it's coming in and it's, hey, what did the Lord teach you this week? What's going on? How can we pray for each other? And there's time that we spend praying for each other.
How long does that meeting typically last?
About an hour and a half, maybe. So, just kind of depends on a little bit what's happening with our families. But meet away from all of our houses and get we all are in similar kind of frame of life as far as family dynamics. So we help get kids situated and then we meet. And so it's about an hour and a half.
Yeah, I guess I'm just very interested in, I guess I need to have some kind of expert on here to talk about, like, we mentioned formation. I don't know if it was last week or a couple weeks ago. Ring the John Mark Comer bell. But like the way that these things, podcast specifically, form us, and even social media to an extent, it doesn't form you in the same way. But I've definitely been formed over the last 15 years over my dangerous use of social media. And so, as the one responsible for social media and the internet, it's like, well, how do I combat that? Because, you think about a podcast, like most people are not sitting in their recliner with their headphones, just, I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to listen to the podcast. They're doing other stuff. But just like psychologically, how is it working to form you in certain ways? And what does that look like spiritually? And there's a question in here somewhere, and I don't know if y'all understand what I'm saying. But I'm just trying to figure out how to get us to that point and do that, because the fact of the matter is, we talked about this on episode 1. Would it be better if people didn't get on social media? Yes, but they are. And so how do we combat that as a church?
Well, when you're listening to a podcast while you're doing something else, to me, there's more entertainment value there than there is anything else. And not that God can't use that. Like God, there's been times I've been cutting the grass or doing stuff around the house, and like somebody says something on a podcast and I had to stop, and like very rarely has this ever happened, but I actually stopped and was like, hey, I got to find the transcript of this and like notate this and send it, somebody, or make a note of it for myself. So, for me at least, let me go back and say, because I would say maybe the terminology entertainment is not the best use for everybody, but I would say for me personally, I find those type settings of a podcast as more of an entertainment thing than probably anything other than that. Because I am the type of person that I cannot, if I'm listening to a sermon, or like I can't do work and listen to a podcast. If that, I can kind of cut the grass, or I can drive in the car, or I can do, some stuff around the house and still listen to podcasts. But if I'm not really listening, I'm not getting any. I can't tell you what I listen to, or can't tell you what is happening there. So I guess the thing to me is like, again, is it entertainment, or is it, are we being intentional with it for spiritual growth?
And I think, you were talking about how you were formed, at least in part, by your social media intake. I think hopefully part of what we're trying to do is that we're trying to add constructive content, because really it comes back down to the content that you intake that forms you. And it doesn't mean that you don't use it for some type of entertainment from time to time. If you want to scroll through funny cat videos, you can certainly do that. There's a time for that. But what you're hoping is that that is a medium that you want to put positive content out there in hopes that people will choose that instead of all the crazy stuff that's out there. Yeah. So I think there's something to what we're trying to do that hopefully lends itself to that.
I would say also too, though, like I find myself in my struggle these days with podcasts and my struggle these days with different resource stuff is like, I listen to this or I read this, but I don't change. Like there's nothing about me that is different or if I do change, I become more like the person I'm listening to and not more like Jesus. Mm. And, God hasn't called me to be the person I'm listening to. He's called me to be a follower of Christ, Jesus, more like Jesus in the personality that he's given me as Chase, So, those are my things that are such a struggle right now. And even like coming through youth ministry and I know God did stuff all in camp experiences, and obviously in leadership now with Wired, I still have hands in a camp experience to a degree, but it's like, man, you go to you have these experiences or you have these things you listen to, but if you're not becoming more like Christ and being any different, then I guess in my brain, I'm like, what's the purpose of it?
Yeah, that's good. And I've tried to be much more purposeful in what I post, in that there's just so much junk out there. I'm trying to make a concerted effort that if I post something or if I repost something, that it's constructive and doesn't add to all the negativity that's out there already. It doesn't mean that there's not a time to be critical of something, but man, world's full of them. I don't know that there's enough people that are trying to be positive. So I've definitely tried to improve the choices that I make when it comes to being out there on social media. And I hope that makes a difference.
This might not be the time to get into this, given that we're almost to our hour mark, but your point about if I am changed, or you said my problem with all this right now is I feel like I'm listening to so much stuff, but I'm not really changing. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that just this is me personally, so maybe people can relate, but I have been formed and have grown from a lot of what I've consumed. But I also know that a lot of times I'm really just listening so that I don't have to sit by myself and like think. And
that's a totally different thing, man.
I saw
it's good thought.
I saw a meme the other day that was like, I literally do all this stuff to prevent like a single thought occurring in my head.
Yeah.
I think it was like, let me switch back and forth between 5 minutes on Facebook, 5 minutes on Instagram, 5 minutes on Substack, all this to prevent a single thought. But like the question I have, just talking about, our journey right now with foster care and, just whether it was a biological child or a foster child, like when you go through your first sickness with a baby and like there's literally not a thing you can do. And it's like, so then you add in it's a long weekend, so like you can't escape to work for a few hours and drop him off at daycare. I know that sounds terrible, but you know what it's like, Chase. But I mean, like just this weekend, it's like, well, there's only so much I can do. I mean, I've been sick for a week and a half myself. So like he needs to go to sleep and Kayla needs a break. So like, let me get him to sleep. Oh, he falls asleep and here I go coughing and now he's awake and now he's screaming. And so it's like, there's so many thoughts going through your head and it's like, what do you do? And then it's like, I'm not patient. This is what I've been doing for the last 5 days. I'm not patient enough. I'm not displaying enough fruit of the Spirit here. I'm not that me and Kayla fight, but like, you know, this is not good. Like something's got to happen here. The child has to go to sleep. He has to stop coughing or we're going to need counseling. And it's like, okay, is it spiritual warfare to say, I have not spent enough time with Jesus. I am not adequately calm in this situation. I'm not being what Kayla needs. I'm not being what the baby needs. Or is it just like, I've spent a lot of time reading scripture, but it hasn't sufficiently transformed my mind like we were talking about earlier. So like, which of these things is it? Or is it just like, sometimes the baby's going to be sick and you're going to be in a season and it's going to suck. You know what I mean? So that's why I was thinking about when you were talking about, I'm listening to all this stuff, I'm reading all this stuff, but I'm still going home and nothing about my attitude has changed.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because, like, you know, I mentioned earlier about meeting with these guys, and it's been really good. But you know, a month or two into it, you know, I had a situation, a moment where I kind of almost like had that same kind of thought. Like I'm trying to do some things that are different than I've ever done as far as like pursuing the Lord and as far as being intentional in some areas that I've neglected in and some different just practices or something like that. And so disciplines type thing. And a couple of months into it, I had a situation with another conversation that, you know, it was kind of like, well, if you're taking this seriously, but you're not any different than you were 2 months ago, then what's the deal with that? And, you know, it really kind of took me back for a second because I was like, oh, crud. Yes, I am trying these things out and I am maybe doing more in a sense of like pursuing the Lord, but it's not really changing me. And, you know, for navigating that, I think I had to kind of work through the idea of like, you know, is this a Holy Spirit driven pursuit or is this a personal production pursuit? And, you know, I think it's easy for us all to kind of in the church today find ourselves personally trying to pursue something that is more of in a production mindset versus like a spirit-filled experience. And, you know, I think, you know, back to your story in a sense, you know, I do think, I mean, your kid situations are going to happen. We talked earlier about seasons. I mean, there's seasons. There are going to be moments where your kid's sick and it's just a hard few days and life is just like, are you ever going to come out of this? And I remember moments being thankful that it was about to be the sunlight because I remember nights that are just like the worst in that. And just remember this, I texted Auburn the other day, shout out Auburn for a second after the baby, and I was like, how you doing? All right, man? He was like, yeah, I'm doing pretty good. And I said, well, I just remember when the light started coming through the window, how much hope that gave me. Like I just made it through another night, you know? And he sent back, yeah. And it's amazing what a great a shower will do for you or something like that. So, So there are just moments that are like that. But then I do think there's levels there that, you know, you have to step back and ask yourself, you know, why am I doing what I'm doing, whether it's listening or reading or all that kind of stuff? And is it more of a check a box production mentality, or is this something that you truly are in tune with the Spirit? Because I think there's a level there that we're never going to respond like Jesus. Okay. So give yourself some grace in a sense of like, you know, when the baby's crying, and there is no worse experience to me than a baby crying anywhere, like in the backseat of a car. That might be the worst experience ever. But like, and then like, as soon as the baby's crying and somebody says something to you and your response to them is not nice at all, and it's like everybody's just in tension, you know? And so I think there's a level there though, like if the Spirit is at work in what you're doing, there should be less, I don't know how to say this, maybe less response unlike Jesus and more response like Jesus maybe, but not that you're going to be perfect.
And it's your first experience. So I think the sixth time you're dealing with this, I think you'll handle it better than the first time. And to that end, I think we all struggle with trying to do an inventory every once in a while and trying to determine if we actually are being more like Jesus, where we would expect to be if we're trying to put the right things in to do that. And sometimes we don't think we are, but I think we change in ways that are imperceptive sometimes, but we actually are changing. And I think that's gives me some hope sometimes when I struggle with the same thing. And am I really moving in that direction or not? I think we are, if we're putting the right things in. It's just not necessarily something you can always measure, especially when the last thing you remember is not responding the way that you should have.
Yeah, that's good. Anything else?
Man, so we went the whole podcast and let Lance's conversation again at the beginning lead the rest of the talk.
Well, I mean, we got a little bit of everything. We walked you through what Substack is.
Yes, you did. You did. I did have something from last week, though, that I was going to add in, but it'll have to wait.
Okay, well, go ahead and ask it, and then that'll be a teaser for episode 5.
Well, no, it was just more so talking about, and we talked about it, you know, Lance, you mentioned the Bibles and stuff like that, but I was listening to another podcast, I think maybe that you sent me about just the current generation and the way things are going. And it just talked about how people right now are looking for an authoritative voice, and they want to be at a place where they hear somebody standing up and saying that this is what truth is. And so the quote goes like this: I think that there's something about coming to a church and hearing someone say without apology, here's the Bible, here's the truth, here's what God says, and here's the way that you should live. And this person, you know, as I was listening to this, was making it clear that people, again, right now are at that point.
Amen. All right, Lance, you got anything to add?
No, I think that'll be maybe something we can dig into next time, because that's goes back to the vibe shift we were talking about at the beginning. I think we had gotten away from that for a long time, and that was, for whatever reason, society just didn't respond to that for quite a while, but now it seems like they may be ready to hear that again.
And I'll add to this, sorry, really quick, but I went home and talked to Lee about our conversation last week, because again, I know I texted you guys, it was very impactful for me. But you know, her question to me was, well, what does the church do about that? And, you know, I think that would be an intriguing thing to kind of throw around, maybe even next episode, because of where we are. What actually should the church be doing, knowing now that people are more open than they've ever been?
Yeah, and I think the last thing I'll say is, you know, Lance mentioned going back to this kind of thing, and it'll be in regards to what the church does. You can't, or we can't, whatever it means. I don't know what it means, and we'll have the conversation, I guess. But we can't take these things that, like, Bible sales are up and people are hungry, we can't take, there are certain things that the church has done that are good, and there's certain parts of tradition that don't need to change. But there's also a lot that we've all seen, starting with, with COVID, before COVID, whatever, however you want to date things. We can't squander the opportunity by just going back to the same old things that we did. So there has to be, I don't know what that means. And I know it's one thing to say that and another thing to actually, do the opposite. But we just need to be thinking about that, because you're just going to lose people again if you just say, okay, well, welcome back. We missed you the last 15 years. We're still doing the same thing we were doing. Okay, well, I'm out. So just something to think about. All right, well, it's been good. Thank y'all for listening to episode 4. Thank you for subscribing on Substack.
Share it. Get the word out.
Yeah, if you found this podcast helpful, share the link with somebody. And don't forget, you can write to us and share your story, your journey at thejourney@rbcdothan.org. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.